There is a moment in every man's life when something quietly breaks inside him, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. It's the moment you realize that no one is watching as closely as you thought. No one is tracking your struggles. No one is keeping score of your sacrifices. No one is coming to validate your effort. And at first, this truth hurts. Because you were taught, subtly, constantly, that if you work hard enough, explain yourself clearly enough, suffer visibly enough, someone will finally care. But Stoicism teaches something far more dangerous. When you truly accept that no one cares, not your excuses, not your intentions, not your inner battles, you stop performing. You stop begging to be understood. You stop living for an audience that was never there. And that's when everything changes. Today, we're going to walk through why this acceptance is not pessimism. It is liberation. It is the moment you reclaim your time, your energy, and your self-respect. Stay with me, because the man who no longer needs to be seen becomes impossible to control. Comment this below. I stand on my own. 1. The freedom of dropping expectations. Most of the pain people carry isn't caused by failure. It's caused by expectation. Expectation that others should notice. Expectation that effort deserves applause. Expectation that if you explain yourself well enough, someone will finally understand. And when that expectation isn't met, resentment begins to grow. You start thinking, after everything I've done, how can they not care? How can they overlook me? Why am I always the one giving and never receiving? From a Stoic perspective, this is the root of emotional suffering. Because the moment you expect the world to behave a certain way, you hand over control of your inner state. You're no longer living deliberately. You are reacting. Stoicism doesn't ask you to become cold or indifferent. It asks you to become precise. Epictetus made this painfully clear when he said, "If you desire things outside your control, you will inevitably be disappointed." Most people hear that and nod politely. Very few actually live by it. They still expect fairness. They still expect recognition. They still expect people to respond with the same depth, loyalty, or integrity they give. And every unmet expectation becomes another invisible wound. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The world does not owe you understanding. People do not owe you attention. Your sacrifices do not entitle you to applause. Once you accept this, not intellectually, but emotionally, something powerful happens. You stop waiting. You stop looking over your shoulder, hoping someone noticed how hard that was. You stop feeling betrayed when effort goes unseen. You stop tying your peace to other people's reactions. This is not bitterness, this is freedom. When expectations drop, clarity rises. You begin to see people as they are, not as you hoped they would be. You begin to act because it aligns with your values, not because you expect a return. Think about how much energy you've wasted replaying moments like this. You help someone and they barely acknowledge it. You stay loyal and they drift away. You give your best and it's treated as ordinary. Each time, the pain didn't come from the action itself. It came from the expectation attached to it. A Stoic removes the attachment. You still act with discipline. You still show integrity, but you do it without keeping score. Because the moment you keep score, you are no longer free. Marcus Aurelius warned against this subtle trap when he wrote that we should do what is right without looking around to see who is watching. That sentence alone can change how you move through life. When you stop expecting validation, your actions become lighter, cleaner, more deliberate. You don't burn out as easily because you're no longer spending energy on disappointment. You don't feel secretly angry because you're no longer waiting for repayment. And most importantly, you stop negotiating with your self-respect. Here is a simple Stoic practice you can apply today. Before any action, ask yourself one question. Would I still do this if no one ever acknowledged it? If the answer is yes, proceed. If the answer is no, pause. Not because the action is wrong, but because your motive needs refinement. This single filter removes bitterness from your life. You act because it is right, not because it will be rewarded. And once you live this way, people's indifference stops hurting you, because you no longer needed their care to begin with. Remember this line: expectation is the root of emotional slavery. Drop it, and you take your first step toward being unshakable. 2. You stop explaining yourself. One of the clearest signs that you still need approval is the urge to explain yourself. You explain your decisions, you explain your boundaries, you explain your silence, you explain your choices as if your life were on trial, and most of the time, no one even asked. Over-explaining doesn't come from clarity. It comes from insecurity, from the fear of being misunderstood, from the fear of being judged unfairly, from the fear that if you don't justify yourself, your worth will be questioned. Stoicism cuts through this illusion without mercy. Epictetus said it plainly: don't explain your philosophy, embody it. In other words, your life is your explanation. The moment you feel the urge to defend yourself, pause and ask, who am I trying to convince? Because strong men don't live in constant defense mode. They act, they choose, they move on. When you explain too much, you reveal something subtle but important: that you believe other people's opinions sit above your own judgment. And that is a dangerous position to live in. Think about how often this shows up in everyday life. You turn something down and immediately soften it with reasons. You make a decision and rush to justify it. You stay silent, then feel guilty and rush back to clarify. Each explanation drains authority, not because explanations are wrong, but because unnecessary explanations signal doubt. Marcus Aurelius warned against this internal leak of power when he wrote about not wasting time worrying about what others think, because it distracts you from living rightly. A Stoic understands this. People who respect you don't need explanations. People who don't respect you won't accept them anyway. So why speak? Silence, when disciplined, is not weakness. It is composure. When you stop explaining yourself, 3 things happen immediately. First, you reclaim your energy. You stop spending mental bandwidth crafting justifications for choices you already made. That energy returns to where it belongs: your actions. Second, you filter relationships naturally. Those who demand explanations are often testing boundaries. When you stop feeding that demand, manipulators drift away. Respectful people adjust. Third, you begin to trust yourself. Every time you resist the urge to over-explain, you reinforce an inner message: my judgment is enough. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. A Stoic doesn't announce boundaries. He lives them. He doesn't argue his values. He demonstrates them through consistency. Imagine how different your presence becomes when you live this way. You speak less, but with weight. You move without announcing. You let outcomes speak louder than intentions. People start paying attention, not because you demanded it, but because you no longer needed it. Here is a simple practice to apply starting today. The next time you feel the urge to explain, stop mid-sentence. Ask yourself, was this explanation requested, or am I seeking comfort? If it wasn't requested, let silence finish the sentence. You don't need to clarify your boundaries. You don't need to justify your pace. You don't need to explain why you chose peace over chaos. Your consistency will teach people everything they need to know. And if they misunderstand you, let them. Misunderstanding is not a threat to a man who knows where he stands. Remember this line: the more you explain yourself, the more you dilute your authority. Silence, used correctly, does the opposite. It concentrates power. And once you stop explaining, you'll notice something unsettling, but freeing. Most people never cared about your reasons in the first place. They only cared whether they could influence you. When that door closes, you step fully into control. 3. You become immune to rejection. Rejection only hurts when approval still matters. Most people don't fear rejection itself. They fear what rejection means about them. They interpret it as, I'm not good enough. I wasn't chosen. I didn't matter. So they avoid risks. They stay quiet when they should speak. They tolerate situations they've outgrown, all to avoid that feeling. Stoicism dismantles this fear at the root. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if something external disturbs you, it is not the thing itself, but your judgment about it. Rejection is external. Your worth is not. Yet most people fuse the two. They hand strangers, employers, partners, audiences, and crowds the authority to decide how valuable they are. That is emotional outsourcing, and it makes you fragile. A Stoic refuses this transaction. He understands that rejection is not a verdict on his character. It is feedback at best and noise at worst. Think about how rejection usually shows up. A message not replied to, an opportunity that goes to someone else, a relationship that doesn't choose you back, an idea that gets ignored. The immediate reaction is almost automatic. Self-doubt. What did I do wrong? What's wrong with me? Why wasn't I enough? But this reaction assumes something dangerous, that the world is a fair and accurate judge. It isn't. People reject for reasons that have nothing to do with you. Their fears, their timing, their preferences, their limitations. Yet you internalize the outcome as identity. Stoicism offers a different lens. You judge yourself only on what is yours to control. Your effort, your conduct, your discipline, your values. Everything else is indifferent. When you adopt this standard, rejection changes shape. It stops being a wound. It becomes information. Not personal, not humiliating, just directional, and something subtle happens inside you. You start acting more boldly. You speak your mind without rehearsing how it will land. You pursue opportunities without attaching your self-worth to the outcome. You walk away when respect disappears, without needing closure, because rejection no longer threatens who you are. Epictetus reminded his students that when someone criticizes or dismisses you, you should ask one question: is this within my control? If not, release it. This isn't emotional suppression, it's emotional precision. You feel the sting, but it doesn't stay. Compare this to how most people live. They replay rejection for weeks. They rewrite conversations. They fantasize about proving someone wrong. That is life force leaking through rumination. A Stoic seals that leak. Here is a practical way to train this immunity. The next time you are rejected, big or small, do not explain it away and do not dramatize it. Instead, write down 3 things. What was fully within my control? What was clearly outside my control? Did I act in alignment with my values? If the answer to the third question is yes, the rejection is irrelevant. Pain fades quickly when meaning is removed, and as rejection loses power, something else grows. Courage. You stop needing guarantees. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop asking for permission. You move because movement is your nature. And ironically, this is when rejection decreases. Not because you try harder to be liked, but because you no longer need to be. People sense that. They feel the difference between someone who is seeking approval and someone who is standing on principle. One is negotiable, the other is grounded. Remember this truth. Rejection only wounds the ego that needs permission to exist. When you no longer ask the world to confirm your value, its refusal stops mattering. You're still standing, still moving, still intact, and that is real power. 4. You start acting for yourself. When you truly accept that no one cares, your behavior changes in a quiet but radical way. You stop acting to be seen. Most people don't realize how much of their daily effort is performance. They work harder when someone is watching. They stay disciplined when there's praise attached. They speak up only when it earns approval. Remove the audience, and most people collapse. Stoicism was designed precisely for this moment. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not for publication, not for recognition, but to discipline his own character. That is the Stoic standard. Do what is right even when it disappears into silence. When applause is removed, only two things remain: your values and your habits. This is where most men confront an uncomfortable question. Who am I when no one is watching? Without likes, without validation, without reassurance. At first, this exposure feels empty. Unrewarded effort feels pointless. Discipline feels heavy. But if you stay with it, something flips. You begin acting for a different reason, not for reaction, but for alignment. You train because strength is part of your identity. You work because excellence is your standard. You speak honestly because integrity matters more than comfort. No audience required. Seneca warned that a man who lives for the approval of others is enslaved by moods he cannot control. The Stoic lives by an internal measure, and once that measure is set, your actions gain a new kind of power. They become consistent. You don't surge and crash depending on attention. You don't disappear when praise dries up. You don't abandon discipline when no one notices. You become reliable to yourself. This is rare, and rarity commands respect without asking for it. Think about the kind of people you instinctively respect. They don't announce their discipline. They don't chase recognition. They don't explain their principles. They simply live them, quietly, repeatedly, without drama. That presence cannot be faked. When you act for yourself, 3 shifts occur. First, you stop negotiating with effort. You don't ask, "Is this worth it?" You ask, "Is this who I am?" Second, you stop resenting others' success. Because you're no longer competing for attention, you're building a private standard. Third, you become difficult to manipulate. Praise doesn't inflate you. Criticism doesn't derail you. Why? Because your motivation is no longer external. This is what Stoics meant by virtue. Not moral posturing, not perfection, but alignment between judgment and action, without witnesses. Here is a simple discipline to build this muscle. Each day, do one hard thing deliberately without telling anyone. No post, no hint, no signal, just you and the act. Over time, this rewires your motivation. You stop needing encouragement to begin. You stop needing recognition to continue. You move because movement is who you are. Remember this: character is built in private, but revealed in public. When you no longer need to be seen, your actions carry weight. Not because people are watching, but because you are. 5. You reclaim your time and energy. Most people are not tired because they do too much. They're tired because their energy is leaking in 100 invisible directions. They replay conversations that already ended. They imagine what others might think. They draft explanations that will never be asked for. They manage impressions instead of building lives. This constant mental noise slowly drains you. Stoicism treats attention as a finite resource. Where you place it shapes who you become. Marcus Aurelius was ruthless about this. He warned against allowing the mind to wander into other people's opinions because it steals time from the only thing that matters: acting rightly. When you accept that no one truly cares, you stop spending energy trying to manage perceptions. You no longer wake up wondering how you're being judged. You no longer rehearse defenses for choices you already made. You no longer monitor reactions like a radar system. That alone returns hours of mental clarity. Think about how much of your day is spent on this. Checking messages not because they matter, but because you want reassurance. replaying moments where you felt ignored, wondering whether you said too much or not enough. None of this builds anything. It only keeps you emotionally busy. A Stoic cuts this off at the source. He asks a simple question: is this within my control? If not, attention is withdrawn, not with anger, not with resentment, with discipline. This is how you reclaim energy. You stop chasing closure. You stop feeding uncertainty. You stop trying to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And something surprising happens. Your days feel longer, not because you have more time, but because your attention is no longer fractured. You think more clearly, you recover faster, you act with less hesitation. Energy that was once spent on rumination is now available for creation. This is where momentum begins. Most people believe they lack motivation. In reality, they lack containment. Their energy leaks through worry, people-pleasing, and self-doubt. Stoicism teaches containment. You don't react to every impulse. You don't respond to every provocation. You don't entertain every thought. You choose. Here is a practice to make this real. For the next 24 hours, notice every time your mind drifts to what someone else thinks, whether you are appreciated, whether you should explain yourself. Each time it happens, label it silently: not mine. Then return your attention to the next concrete action in front of you. No argument, no justification, just redirection. This is how energy is reclaimed, moment by moment. Over time, people notice something different about you. You're calmer, less reactive, harder to pull off center. Not because you don't feel, but because you don't waste feeling on what doesn't matter. Remember this line: what you stop feeding loses power. When you stop feeding the need to be seen, your time comes back. When your time comes back, your life finally starts moving forward. 6. You become quietly dangerous. There is a certain kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't need to be loud to be felt. It comes from a man who no longer needs anything from the room he walks into. When you accept that no one cares, you stop trying to influence people emotionally. You stop managing impressions. You stop signaling strength. And paradoxically, this is when real strength appears. Most people try to look powerful. They talk about plans. They hint at progress. They broadcast intentions. A Stoic moves in silence. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is to be unlike the one who harmed you. Not louder, not harsher, but unshaken. When you no longer need approval, you become unpredictable. Not chaotic, unattached. People can't read you easily anymore. They can't provoke the reaction they expect. They can't control you through praise or neglect. That is why silent strength is dangerous. Because manipulation requires emotional hooks, and you've removed them. Think about how people usually gain leverage. They offer validation, they withdraw attention, they provoke guilt, they create pressure. All of this works only if you care. Once you don't, those tactics collapse. You don't rush to respond. You don't overcorrect when ignored. You don't explain when misunderstood. You act on your timeline. This unnerves people. Not because you're aggressive, but because you're no longer available for control. Seneca warned that dependence is the fastest path to inner captivity. The man who needs little cannot be threatened. This is not emotional numbness. It's emotional sovereignty. You still feel, but your feelings no longer dictate your behavior. You observe, you decide, you move. Quietly. This changes how people interact with you. Some will lose interest because they can no longer extract energy. Others will grow curious because your presence carries weight without effort. You don't chase either response. You remain centered. Here is a shift worth noticing. When you stop broadcasting your intentions, your actions become sharper. When you stop explaining your moves, your outcomes speak louder. When you stop seeking reaction, your focus deepens. You become efficient, dangerously so, because your energy is no longer split between doing and being seen. It is fully invested in execution. This is the man Stoicism was designed to forge. Not dramatic, not flashy, but grounded beyond disturbance. Here is a discipline to cultivate this presence. For the next week, reduce your words by half. Speak when necessary. Respond when it matters. Let silence handle the rest. Observe how often silence does the work for you. People reveal more. Situations clarify themselves. Tension dissolves or exposes its source. You'll realize something important. You don't need to assert power. Power is felt when nothing can pull you off center. Remember this. The most dangerous man in the room is the one who needs nothing from it. No validation, no approval, no reassurance, just direction. And once you embody this, people no longer decide your worth. You do. 7. The acceptance ritual. Acceptance is not a thought, it is a discipline. Most people agree with Stoic ideas, but never embody them. They understand the words, yet their habits remain unchanged. This is where transformation either locks in or fades. So instead of more theory, here is a ritual. 7 days. No drama, no announcements, just quiet alignment. Day 1. Stop explaining. For 1 full day, do not explain your decisions unless directly required. No justifying, no softening, no unnecessary context. Notice how often you want to explain. That urge reveals where approval still has power over you. Let silence hold the line. Day 2. Act without sharing. Do something productive and difficult, then tell no one. No post, no hint, no indirect signaling. Train your nervous system to act without reward. This day breaks the addiction to being seen. Day 3. No validation checks. Do not check for reactions. No refreshing messages, no rereading replies, no monitoring who noticed what. Every time the impulse arises, redirect attention to a task in front of you. This day reclaims your attention. Day 4. Do the hard thing. Early, identify the task you normally delay. Do it first, quietly, without encouragement. This builds self-trust, the rarest form of confidence. Day 5. Observe who remains. Pull back slightly. Not cold, not rude, just less available. Watch who respects the distance and who reacts poorly to it. You are not judging them. You are learning. Day 6. Write your values. On paper, write 3 values you will not negotiate. Not goals, not roles. Values. Then write 1 daily action that proves each value without witnesses. This day installs an internal compass. Day 7. The oath. Read everything you wrote this week. Then write 1 sentence, 1 line you will live by. For example, I move without applause. I don't explain myself to feel safe. I act with discipline, not for approval. This is your oath. Not to the world, to yourself. By the end of these 7 days, something subtle but irreversible happens. You stop reaching outward for stability. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop waiting to be acknowledged. You are no longer living reactively. You are living deliberately. This is what Stoics meant by inner freedom. Not escape from life, but independence within it. When you accept no one cares, everything changes. Here's the truth most people never sit with long enough. No one is coming to save you. No one is tracking your effort. No one is required to understand your journey. And once you stop resisting that truth, you stop bleeding energy. You've seen what happens when expectations drop. You stop explaining. You stop fearing rejection. You act from values, not applause. You reclaim your time. You move quietly and become impossible to control. This is not loneliness. This is sovereignty. Stoicism was never about withdrawing from life. It was about standing so firmly within yourself that life can no longer push you off center. When you no longer need to be seen, you are free to build. When you no longer need approval, you are free to choose. When you no longer expect anyone to care, you finally care about the right things. Your discipline, your character, your direction. Carry this with you. You don't need to announce your strength. You don't need permission to live deliberately. You don't need an audience to become formidable. Move without applause. Act without explanation. Stand without reassurance. If this message resonated, let it anchor, not entertain, you. Comment below. I stand on my own. Subscribe if you choose discipline over comfort. And remember, the man who needs nothing cannot be controlled by anything. Stay steady.